Okay, here we go. Let me erase these first. We're going to talk about fluid compartments, right? And why in the heck do they call it fluid compartments, right? Yes. You know, when I was a kid, the refrigerator, it had certain drawers for different things and this and that, and it was different compartments in the refrigerator, right? Yes. And when I was a kid back then, they were metal. It was great, and your refrigerator lasted for decades. But anyway, okay? So, fluid compartments, yes? Now, you make a big ship nowadays, yes? And what do? They have bulkheads, right? Right? And each ship has different compartments, right? And the walls in between are called bulkheads, right? Why is that? Especially for a military ship. Because if they get a hole knocked in here and this compartment floods, guess what? They can shut the watertight doors and it won't sink because this compartment is isolated from this compartment, right? Yes? Different compartments on the ship. Okay? Now, in our body, let's talk about water content, okay? And the fluid compartments in the water, okay? Total body water is a function of, and make sure you get these. Total body water is a function of age, okay? As a general rule, younger people have much more water. Body mass, okay? Who do you think carries more water, men or women? Men. As a general rule, men, right? And we'll talk about why in a minute. Amount of body fat, okay, yes. Now, an infant, right? About 73% water, okay? 73%, isn't that astounding? 3/4 of that baby laying there is water. Wow, that's amazing, okay? Young men, about 60%. H2O. Young women, okay, about 50%, right? But here's the kicker. Skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle, 75% H2O. That's astounding, okay? What are the bodybuilders big on? Oh, drink your water, drink your water. If you ever go to a bodybuilding contest, they'll all have a big bottle of water. They'll be drinking their water, right? Because 75% of those big muscles is water. If you go up to those guys with a pen and you go like this, psh, water will shoot out like a water balloon. No, I'm kidding, not really. But anyway, okay? Skeletal muscle, okay? So let's talk just a minute. Infant, 73%. 73%, right? It's also infants, if they start going up and get diarrhea real bad, guess what? They get dehydrated real quickly, right? Okay? Young men, 60% water, okay, right? Dr. Ben Bickman, he says, our body is basically a tall column of water. And I never thought about that, but he's right, okay? Young women, 50%. Why would that be? How come women have less water than men? What would you think, as a general rule?
Body mass.
Body mass? Yes, but what's specific about the body mass? Okay, no takers, huh? Okay, well here's the deal, right? As a general rule, again, we're speaking in generalities. As a general rule, men, not me, but like Mr. Christian or Joseph here, right? Those big muscles that they have are made up of a lot more water, okay? As a general rule, ladies don't have as many muscles as men, or as large of muscles as men. So that's one reason. The second thing is this, right? Yes? Part of what makes ladies so beautiful is they have that layer of subcutaneous fat, right? If you see a lady that looks like a bodybuilder and very muscular, that ain't natural. That's not normal. That's not attractive. my humble opinion, right? Ladies have that layer of body fat, and body fat is only about 20% hydrated, okay? So, I should say adipose tissue, right? Use a fancy word, right? Adipose tissue is only 20%, right? Muscle, 75%, but adipose tissue, 20%, right? Okay? And so that's why ladies carry less water than men. Okay? After infancy, total body water declines throughout our life. When you get elderly, right, like Dr. Weld is getting, I'm probably down to 50% water, and then in the next 10 years, I'll probably only be 45% water. Where Big Macho Christian over there is like 60% water, see? And that's another reason why older people can get dehydrated much more quickly than younger people, okay? It's more dangerous, okay? And again, the ladies carry more body fat. That's what makes them so beautiful. And it's only 20% water, okay? So you ladies carry less water and such. Okay, let's talk about the fluid compartments, right? ICF, intracellular, A, I-N-T-R-A. That A means within. Intracellular, the water inside your cells. Here's a cell, here's a nucleus, the water inside the cell, right? Yes? It's about 25 liters, okay? About 25 liters. Now, interstitial fluid, IF, interstitial fluid. Remember, you have your cells, right? And here they're bathed in interstitial fluid around here, yes? Interstitial fluid is considered extracellular fluid, ECF, right? Extracellular fluid, extra meaning outside of the cell, right? But oh, by the way, extracellular fluid also includes the plasma, right? The plasma in the blood, yes? The plasma is the liquid part of the blood, and it's mainly water with protein, right? And electrolytes, but still, the blood plasma is outside your cells, and so it is technically extracellular fluid. Now, a lot of times when we have discussions and we talk about extracellular fluid, and we're really talking about interstitial fluid, right? The fluid outside the cells. But technically, extracellular fluid includes the blood plasma, and that's about 3 liters. And interstitial fluid is about 12 liters. 3 and 12, that's about 15 total. Okay, and over here, to about 25. So 15 and 25. Joseph's not here to see. 25, 35, 40. 40 liters, about 40 liters of water in an average person, okay? Again, older person less, younger person, baby, child, more. By the way, I shouldn't say a child, okay? Now, way back to chapter 2, right? Remember this, it comes back to haunt us one more time. Yes, if you have a bunch of salt over here, you dump a bunch of salt over here, and not very much salt over here, and this is a semi-permeable membrane, yes? A little bit of salt over here and a lot over here, and I could say sugar instead of salt or whatever, but anyway, okay? What is going to happen? Osmosis is going to happen. We're going to get the movement of water. Water is able to go through the filter, right? And what's going to happen is, here you dump it in, and an hour later, what's going to happen is this, right? Water is going to move this way, right? Yes? It's going to move from a lower osmolality, which is a fancy way, if it's salt, saying how salty it is, a lower area of salt, to a higher area of salt. Why? Because the body is trying to balance that, right? So the water is going to move. So what happens to the water, the column of water? Well, here it goes down because the water is moving this way. Here it goes up, right? And our analogy to the body is this semi-permeable membrane, right? That's the endothelium of our blood vessels. Yes? Remember they have pores, fenestrations, right? And that endothelium, yes? So water is going to come in and out. Right? Electrolytes, which are ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, etc., have the greatest ability to cause fluid shifts. Okay? 2, water intake must equal water output. If you think about it, right? If you drink a whole bunch of water, but you don't excrete a whole bunch of water, then guess what? You're going to swell up, right? Conversely, if you're not drinking and you're urinating, getting rid of water, you're going to dehydrate. You're going to go down, right? So intake must equal output, right? Okay. Okay, this keeps osmolality in balance, okay? Our book, there's a diagram on page 869. In my book, let's see, I'll tell you it'll be a little different in yours, just one second. Okay? The thirst mechanism, right? In the hypothalamus, we have osmoreceptors. Osmoreceptors, right? They tell you how salty the blood is. And they can either dehydrate and shrivel up, or they can swell up when you have a lot of water, right? And that stimulates our thirst mechanism, okay? If we get dehydrated, it makes us thirsty. If we have drank a bunch, it stops that thirst mechanism, right? And 2, our book says thirst is not always a reliable indicator of need, okay? How thirsty we are, our book says, is not always indicative of how dehydrated we are, right? Because if you're playing in a football game, yes, and you run to the sideline between plays and they spray the water in your mouth, right? And you wash it around and you swallow it, and it'll make your thirst go away, right? But if it's 100 degrees out there and that football game lasts 3 hours, you're probably going to get dehydrated, right? If you're not drinking enough, okay? We talked too about elderly people. Elderly people, a lot of times they are not as sensitive, and maybe have Alzheimer's and such. So when they become thirsty, they don't recognize that as thirst. Maybe they think they're hungry. You see what I'm saying? They can be confused that way. And so it's very easy for older people to become dehydrated. And when they get dehydrated, what do? They get confused. Yes, very good. And also they fall down. Okay? Very common. Okay? Right? Or again, think about if you're running a marathon and you're not drinking. Okay? Okay. Now, ADH, right? AKA vasopressin, right? ADH, aka vasopressin, right? Antidiuretic hormone, right? Remember, we save the fluid and we don't urinate as much out, right? Saving the sodium, getting rid of the potassium, and also too with the potassium, hydrogen goes out too. But anyway, ADH, you remember, alcohol interferes with this mechanism. And that's why if you drink a bunch of alcohol, you'll urinate a bunch and you'll get the hangover because all your brain cells will dehydrate. Okay? Dehydration, fluid loss caused by, and that's another thing, we haven't talked about that it's not just sports or exercise that can cause us to be dehydrated. We can be dehydrated from other things. Okay? dehydration, dehydration, right? Okay. Number 1, hemorrhage. Right? If you get cut real bad and boom, you lose a lot of blood, you're going to be dehydrated very quickly. Number 2, severe burns. right? We talked about that. Here's a cell, yes, and if the cell membrane gets burned away, guess what? There's nothing to keep that water inside the cell, right? Again, where I worked in the hospital in the late 70s, early 80s, there were chemical plants around where we lived, and every 6 months there'd be a small explosion or such, and some guys would get burned real bad, right? And anytime guys got burned real bad, then the amount of IV solutions, we would normally use 100 cases a week at that hospital, about 200-bed hospital. And anytime we got burn patients, it went up to 125, 150 cases of IV solutions a week, because they got to continually, because the burn patients, they just take a lot of water, okay? Prolonged vomiting, right? Yes, or diarrhea. Vomiting or diarrhea, either one, you're losing fluid, yes? Okay? How about profuse sweating? Profuse sweating, yes? You go hiking in the desert, you get lost. You're in big trouble, right? Yes? You know, I like to wear my Panama hat, right? Because my dad taught me you got to take your shade with you, right? Yes? To keep yourself cool and to keep from sweating out, okay? Okay. Water deprivation, WATERDEPRIVATION. Water deprivation, yes. Last weekend I did a mountain, but 2 weekends before that, I did another mountain, and I forgot my backpack, right? And I had a big jug of water, but it was a big steel heavy one, half liter, at least 64 ounces. But I'm not carrying a big heavy thing up there because I had no backpack to put it on my back. But I had 2 little bitty plastic water bottles, right? Like 12 ounces. So I fill those up, right? I'm hiking up a mountain with one in each pocket. Yes, of my jacket. And time I got almost to the top of that mountain, I'd stopped and I drank one, and I knew I'm running low on water. And there was a guy and his lovely wife coming down, and they stopped, and now we're talking to him, we're visiting, and he's like, well, I'm on the way down, man. You got plenty of water? They saw I didn't have a backpack or anything. You got plenty of water? And I'm like, well, you got extra? He's like, oh yeah, man. And he pulled out a platypus is? Platypus is a water bladder that some of them are 1 liter, some of them are 2. I have one that's 3 liters, And so he filled up, I drank, finished that bottle, then he filled my bottle up for me, gave me extra 12 ounces and such. I guess you could see that I was suffering, but anyway, right? So water deprivation, yes, okay? Now 2, you take too many diuretics, right? Water pills. You want to be skinny, I gotta take a bunch of diuretics and pee all your water out, or they give you too much. That's another thing you need to understand too. We talked about when we're older, then our kidneys don't work so well. Not like when we were 19 or 20 years old, right? But also too, you don't realize the kidneys excrete medicine, break it down and excrete it, right? But here's the thing, older people, their kidneys aren't working so well. So if I took a Valium, like a relaxer, it may stay in my system for 3 or 4 days. But an older person, because their kidneys don't work so well, when I say older, I mean older compared to me, right? It may be 10 days or 11 days. So when you give medicine to an older person, as a general rule, the dosage should be less than you would give a 20-year-old, right? Now, a great big giant of a man, he takes more medicine than a little small scrawny guy like me, right? But also too, older people, you have to be very careful. You can over-medicate them very easily because the half-life, right? The half-life of that medicine is much longer in older people because their kidneys aren't working so good. As good, I should say, okay? What are the signs of dehydration, right? What are the signs?
Confusion, muscle weakness.
right? Yes, yes. But what's the most common things when you start getting dehydrated? You get to what? Dry mouth. Thank you. Dry mouth. Yes. Right. Dry mouth. Right. If you sweat a bunch, then you'll get dry, flushed skin. Right. What about urination? What's going to happen to it? Up or down? It's going to go down, right? Because you're water fluid, right? So we got a word for that. Oliguria. Did I spell it right? Yes, I did. Okay. Oliguria versus anuria, right? Remember, yesterday we talked about anuria. A meaning not or without, right? So that's about 50 mils or less, about 2 ounces of pee or less a day, right? Oliguria is meaning you do not produce much urine, okay? We get the same word, are you familiar with the word oligarch, right? They're, a tiny group of very rich people that control the whole economy of the world, and they're oligarchs, and da-da-da, and they do this and they do that, and blah, 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 and all that, right? But anyway, it's the same root word, right? Oligo means not very much urine, and this is no urine or a very small amount, like 1 to 2 ounces, about 50 mils. Okay? Okay. Hypotonic hydration. Hypotonic hydration. Let's talk about that. Okay, let me get let's see. Okay, here we go. That is figure 25.7. Okay. Excessive loss of H2O. Okay. In our book, they draw a little faucet, a little tap. If you lose a bunch of water, okay? Okay, here we go. Let's talk about that. Right? Again, that's figure 25.7. Yes? If you lose a bunch of water, excessive loss of water, right? Then you're going to have more salt outside, more sodium outside the cell than you are inside the cell, right? So therefore, what's going to happen is the water from inside the cell is going to come out, right? And the cell is going to shrivel up, okay? You become dehydrated. Just the opposite, right? Excessive. If you drink water, okay, then what happens is you dilute, the osmolality goes down here, and guess what? You've got more salt inside the cell. When you have more sodium inside the cell, where's the water going to go? Inside the cell. What's the cell going to do? Swell up. What happens if the cell swells up? If it swells up too much, it does what? What happens when you're running that water in that water balloon and it gets bigger, and you don't stop running that water in there? What happens to it, Dawn? It goes pow, right? It busts. That's what will happen to your cell. More and more water, okay? Now, let's talk about that. Real life scenario, okay? I don't know if you folks know this because you're young, but years ago, they didn't sell tons of bottled water in the convenience store or in the grocery store. Everybody drank tap water, Okay? Okay? So, I don't know the guy's name. He's a marketing genius. He decided, guess what? He was going to sell water in bottles, right? And water's very cheap, about 2 or 3 cents a liter, okay? Tap water. But he decided, no, I'm going to sell it in fancy bottles, and it's going to be expensive, right? Water, before gasoline went so high, water was about as expensive as gasoline, if you think about it, right? Okay? So, they began a marketing campaign. And what happened was, what they convinced people that it's cool. You see people walking around, everybody, they got their water bottle with them, right? Yes. Okay. And athletes, they convinced athletes that you got to drink water, don't be dehydrated. And they told us, oh, most of the time we walk around, we're dehydrated, right? And then some nutrition person that had no degrees or anything, no training, said, oh, you need to drink 8 12-ounce glasses of water a day. That's a totally made up number. Nowhere is that in the science, okay? Right? And guess what? The guy started getting rich. But let me tell you what happened, okay? What happened was this. They convinced athletes, you got to drink, you got to drink, you got to drink, okay? Do you need to drink when you exercise? You may need to drink some, but not very much unless you're exercising over an hour, okay? If you're exercising over an hour, yeah, you probably do need to drink some, but prior to that, maybe a little, not much, okay? But what happened is this. There's a lady, true story, she's running the Boston Marathon, okay? And she's almost completed the marathon, and she's like a half a mile from the finish, and there's her family there and this and that, and she falls down and she collapses. And her husband goes running up there, and she doesn't know who he is. And she doesn't know what her name is, right? And what do you think? Oh, wow, she's dehydrated. She didn't drink enough, right? No, just the opposite. She ran the whole marathon, and oh, don't get dehydrated. So she was drinking, and she was drinking regular water with no electrolytes, right? So what happened was her sodium levels got so low, she had a bunch of interstitial fluid, but her sodium levels in the interstitial fluid were so low, guess what? Her brain cells started swelling, and she had the same signs and symptoms as someone that's dehydrated, right? Yes? She drank so freaking much water during the Boston Marathon, right? And her sodium levels were so low. It's called hypo, H-Y-P-O, natremia, N-A-T-R-E-M-I-A. Hyponatremia, okay? That had never happened before early 80s, okay? And then guess what? People all over the world in marathons, the big major marathons, somebody would die, right? And now, every marathon has people on staff, has medics on staff there, right? Yes? So, if you're running a big long marathon like that, yes, you need Gatorade with electrolytes in it, or Powerade, or whatever you want to call it, right? But just drinking water alone, if you drink too much, you can cause yourself hyponatremia. They invented a new disease, okay? Now, they wanted to know why the woman died, right? And there's an eminent scientist, a medical doctor called Dr. Tim Noakes, Noakes, MD, right? Right? He was a professor and a researcher, and he figured out what the problem was, and he ended up writing a book, and the title of the book is Waterlogged, Waterlogged, right? And he talks all about how it was a marketing campaign, all about how they got all these people drinking all this water, and they don't. And he talked about one of the African, he's a South African, and one of the South African guys that won the Boston Marathon in the early 70s, and he ran the whole marathon, and he drank less than 10 ounces of water for the 26 miles, right, and such. But anyway, that's the name of his book, Waterlogged. Dr. Tim Noakes, right? He's an eminent scientist and researcher. And oh, by the way, he was a marathoner. He wrote a famous book, The Lore of Running, right? And what happened was his father died of type 2 diabetes. And even though he was trim and a runner, he developed type 2 diabetes, right? And he's a brilliant guy, and he's in the bookstore and he sees a book, The New Atkins Diet, right? So he's like, oh great, Atkins is coming back, you know, the low carb, high fat, all that. And he looks in the back, and they list the research in the back, and guess what? He knows a bunch of those guys, and he knows they're really real good researchers. He bought the book, he read the book, he read all their literature that it was based on. And guess what? He's a low carber. He's one of the world's foremost authorities on low carb now. And his book, The Lore of Running, which has been in print for like 30 years, he had to rewrite a whole chapter and say, I'm sorry, this was a mistake, because he told you to win the marathon, you got to eat a bunch of carbs and all that junk. Yeah. And he feels terrible because his father died of type 2 diabetes. If he would have just been a low carber, he'd say, I know I could have saved his life. He would have lived many more years, right? And such. And he developed it, yes? So, but anyway, very, very eminent researcher. But anyway, hyponatremia. Natremia is from the Latin for the sodium, right? Hypo. Oh, okay, I already wrote it up there, right? Okay, there we go. Anyway, it's a big deal. Okay? Okay. Edema. Accumulation of fluid in the interstitial spaces, leading to tissue, but not cell swelling, right? Edema in the interstitial spaces around the cells, right? Around the cells, you get too much water, yes? Okay, and what can that be caused by? It can be caused by the valves in your legs we talked about, right? The varicose veins. We also talked about if you get a tumor that blocks your drainage, right? Your lymphatic drainage. We also talked about if you're a lady and you have a breast surgery and they cut out lymph nodes and it blocks the drainage, it can swell up. We also talked about if you have congestive heart failure and your heart, especially the left side, boom, 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 can't pump that blood out, what happens? The blood backs up. Where does it back up? In the ankles, in the feet, in the legs, in the fingers, extremities, right? Okay. And our book also says high blood volume. Okay. Okay. The balance between sodium input and output is the most important renal function. I'm going to say that again. I'll paraphrase. The most important thing that kidneys do is to make sure we have enough and not too much sodium. Why is that? Because sodium is going to determine how much water we carry. Sodium is going to determine how much blood there is in our circulatory system. And the amount of blood in our circulatory system is going to determine our blood pressure, right? Our blood pressure. So if we lose a bunch of sodium and we lose a bunch of fluid, our blood pressure is going to be low. And too much sodium if the kidneys aren't functioning as well. Okay? Okay. Remember too, where the sodium goes, the water flows. If the sodium's outside of the cell, it's going to flow that way. If there's more sodium inside the cell, it's going to go that way. It's going to go from an area of lower, listen to me, lower osmolality to higher osmolality, okay? The body always strives for balance, yes? If you get things out of balance in your life, very bad things can happen, right? Yes? Yes? Too much spending, not enough saving, bad. Too much time with your friends, not enough time with your wife. Bad. You know what that leads to? Right? Tammy Wynette. R-D-I-V. Okay, I won't say it. Right? Yes. Right? Yes. So, okay. Okay. Concentration of sodium controls the blood pressure through blood volume. Okay. Here we go. Let's talk about what controls the sodium, right? Let's talk about what controls the sodium, right? Basically, we're going to talk about hormones, yes? Okay? Now, I will say this too. A lot of the health and fitness people want to tell us, oh, a lot of times we go around and we're going around, we're walking around, we're dehydrated. You need to drink your water and blah, blah, blah. I'll never forget, I saw a guy on a program, and he was talking, and he's like, well, you know, they tell us that, and oh, by the way, the guy was a medical doctor, and he spent his entire career researching the kidneys. Probably knew more about kidneys than about anybody else. And he said, well, that's not really true. The kidneys are amazing, and the kidneys are very good at determining our sodium content. Yes, right? And that's another reason it's very frustrating to me that heart patients, if their sodium gets way too low, guess what? They're very likely to die. And what do they tell them? Oh, restrict your salt, right? Yes? Okay. And most of that's based on one study from the 1970s. That's not good. But anyway, I won't go there. Okay, we don't have time enough for that. But, okay, here we go, right? Okay. Renin, right? Angiotensinogen, right? And you know the last one, aldosterone, right? This mechanism, yes, remember the granular, Granular, the granular cells sense, oh no, our blood pressure's too low, secretes renin. What does renin do? Renin goes, and it cleaves the angiotensinogen, and there's da-da, and next thing you know, leads to release of aldosterone, right? Aldosterone, one of the mineralocorticoids, right? From the second layer, the zona, I forget, of the adrenal glands, right? Yes? And what do? Aldosterone makes us save sodium and excrete potassium, right? Yes? Oh, by the way, we'll also talk in a minute, we excrete hydrogen too, by the way. But anyway, okay? Yes? So, what's going to happen is decrease urinary output and increase blood volume. And the increased blood volume is going to lead to, increase blood pressure, right? You have more volume, you're going to have more pressure. Okay? Yes? Okay. I should have just skipped that and done this right here. Renin, angiotensinogen, aldosterone, increase water, increase BP for short. Now, what's on the opposite of this? ANP, atrial natriuretic protein. Yeah, protein. Peptide, sorry, not protein, peptide. But peptide is a form of protein, ANP. Anyway, ANP, decrease blood volume, decrease BP. Remember, ANP, especially from the atria, hence the name atrial, right? When the atria, when they get stretched, they go, hey man, we got too much water here. We need to dump some of this water, right? It's just the opposite of aldosterone, yes? Here's another thing that's very interesting, ladies, right? Chemically, aldosterone, guess what it's very close to? Say it? estrogen, right? Yes, estrogen. Ladies, next chapter we'll talk about when the estrogen goes up, right? And then later the progesterone goes up, right? And the estrogen goes down. The estrogen, I have heard, I've been told, I don't know, I'm not a lady, that at certain times in their cycle, the estrogen goes higher, right? And you retain fluid, and maybe your breasts feel fuller, right? And then as the cycle, the estrogen goes down, right? Estrogen edema, because if you get pregnant, the estrogen stays up for long periods of time and you gain weight and your cheeks get puffy, right? And such, but the progesterone, as it goes up, it does the opposite of the estrogen, by the way. But anyway, interesting, okay? Yes, ma'am.
Repeating those words that are on the website? Sorry.
This?
Yes.
Renin, angiotensinogen, aldosterone, right? Renin, angiotensinogen, aldosterone. Yeah, we talked about that a couple of times. Yes? Okay? Now, here, let's do this. Let's go ahead and do it this way. Female sex hormone, estrogens. Okay? Increase sodium chloride absorption. Okay? Fluid retention. Okay, over here, progesterone, sodium loss, and water loss. Right? Because where the sodium goes, the water's going to flow. Right? Okay? Yes? Okay, again, there's like 4 different types of estrogens we're going to talk about in the next chapter. But anyway, right? That's why they say, I've heard, sometimes at the start of your cycle you crave salty foods. I don't know. I'm not a lady. That's just what I've heard. So anyway, okay? Opposites. A and P, aldosterone, opposites, right? Do the opposite. Yes? Okay. Okay, potassium balance. Okay, potassium balance. Okay, I'm not going to go a lot into that, but remember, when we retain sodium, we're going to get rid of the potassium. They're like matter and antimatter, okay? So if we're retaining sodium, we're getting rid of potassium. If your potassium gets very high, or your potassium gets very low, you can get nausea and vomiting and problems like that. But if it gets very high or it gets very low, either one, it's going to throw your heart out of rhythm. Okay? And when it throws your heart out of rhythm, you can have a heart attack or die. I think you remember I told you the story about my friend, the pharmacist Dan, the very young guy. He started IV on himself in the hotel room, and then he put a bunch of potassium in there. And potassium went way too high, and it threw his heart out of rhythm and killed himself painlessly, right? Laid there and made his heart stop. Okay? So usually the kidneys are way messed up and such for a situation like that. But anyway, okay? So, either way, high or low potassium, okay? Both of them, arrhythmias, okay? Okay. Now we're going to totally change topics and do the last topic of this chapter, okay? And that is acid-base balance, and we're going to have a quick little lecture on acid-base balance, right? Okay. Now, what is the big deal about that? What is the big deal about that? Well, it goes back to chapter number 1, right? Homeostasis, yes? Okay. What is the normal pH of the blood? 7.35 to 7.45, right? 735 to 745, yes? Very, very important. Okay. If it goes much below here, this way, is it going towards acid or base? Acid. If it goes much lower than that, we're going to say acidosis, right? If it goes this way, much higher than that, what are we going to say? Alkalosis, right? Acidosis, alkalosis. If your blood gets screwed up, if it's too basic, then what will happen is you die. If it gets too acidic, what happens? You die. Either way, right? Either way, it's going to kill you. Yes? Here, you're probably going to convulsions first. Here, you're probably going to coma first. But anyway, either way, it's going to kill you if your blood gets too far out of whack. Yes? Chapter 1. Yes? You drive the car. Yes? Where do you have to keep the car? In between the lines. If you don't, then you have a wreck, right? Yes. Anybody have experience with that? Yes. I know I do. But anyway, yes. Especially on motorcycles. Golly, they're always off road. Okay, right? Remember, what's neutral? 7.0 is neutral. Right? Inside your cells, the fluid is about 7.0, right? Intra, I-N-T-R-A, A meaning inside, intracellular fluid. Okay? Right? Okay. Again, above 7.45 alkalosis, below 7.35 acidosis. Okay? Okay. Now, remember, what determines the pH? Hydrogen in the blood, right? The pH of something is how much hydrogen it is, right? A bunch of hydrogen, acid. Not very much hydrogen, alkaline. Okay? Right? Okay. The hydrogen concentration in the blood is regulated by chemical buffers, right? We talked about that. CO2 plus H2O, right? Yes, H2CO3 plus HCO3 minus plus H plus, right? Carbonic anhydrase, carbonic acid, bicarb, and hydrogen. Yes? And remember too, this reaction, it has an arrow each way, meaning it can go this way or it can go this way, right? Either way, yes? That's why it's a buffer. It will go like that, right? Like the Peaches, right? Maurice, the man in the middle, yes? He's a buffer, right? Between Barry and Robin, who were both crazy strong personalities, yes? Right? The song, The Man in the Middle, that's what Maurice wrote that, yeah? Okay, there you go, okay? So it can go either way. Too much, hydrogen, acidic. Not enough, basic. Bicarb. There are other buffer systems, I believe 4 or 5 more off the top of my head, but the most important one is bicarb, okay? Right? Okay. Now, yeah. And let me put this down for just a minute. Let's just talk, right? Here's the deal. Yes? Your blood could get too acid or too alkaline. It can happen very quickly, or it can happen over a long period of time. Okay? How does it happen quickly? Yes? Okay? How does it happen quickly? If I hold my breath long enough, what's going to happen? I'm going to get a buildup of what? CO2, right? I'm going to get a buildup of CO2, yes? And the CO2 is going to get hooked up with water to form this, right? If I don't breathe, I'm going to get respiratory, R-E-S-P-I-R-A-T-O-R-Y, acidosis. Respiratory acidosis, right? If I do it long enough, my blood's going to get acid because I'm going to get a bunch of CO2, and that's going to, a whole bunch of one component is going to shift it that way, right? That's what's going to happen if you study your chemistry. If you get a whole bunch of your, what are they called, products? No, the product is the end result. Your reactants. If I get a whole bunch of this, it's going to shift it that way. That's what happens in chemistry, okay? Now, the other side of that is, what happens if I do this? What am I doing? I'm getting rid of what? CO2. So, my oxygen's going to go up, but my CO2 is going to go way down, right? So I'm not going to have very much of this, right? So my blood is going to become alkaline because I blew off all the CO2, right? And so that is what happens. Respiratory acidosis or alkalosis. Either way, it happens within 1 to 3 minutes. Boom, I can shift my blood chemistry, right? You can take the pH of my blood and I'll go, okay, give me 90 seconds, and I can make it acid or I can make it basic, right? Because it happens very suddenly. Because guess what? The body's amazing. It has to keep between those two numbers, right? Right? Okay. So let's talk about it. Respiratory acidosis, right? Acidosis caused by hypoventilation, right? And then respiratory alkalosis, right? Okay, let's talk about respiratory acidosis. So the pH is going to be below 735, right? Yes? Now, there's several reasons why I don't breathe enough, or why my blood gets acidic, right? How about this? COPD, yes? Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, right? If my heart's not pumping that blood and I'm not getting rid of the CO2, and the CO2 is building up because my heart is weak and it's a weak pump, then that can happen. I can get respiratory acidosis, right? What about if I have a disease? Cystic fibrosis, right? Cystic fibrosis, right? Or what about shallow breathing? Shallow breathing, okay? Let me explain this. There are certain people that are mountain climbers that are amazing. They can go to very high altitude and climb these massive high mountains, right? Yes? And there are other people, they can't do it. They get altitude sickness, they have all kinds of problems. I can do what I do because I have a genetic gift, okay? Right? I can take the high altitude, yes? But guess what? I forget what it's called. I'm embarrassed, but anyway. Your brain determines that. And certain people that go to high altitude, their brain automatically tells them, speed up your breathing, speed up your breathing, speed up your breathing. And other people that don't. And the people whose breathing speeds up have less trouble with altitude. And the people who don't, right? Yes? There are certain people that are terribly strong, but you can't take them to high altitude or they'll be in trouble, right? Pulmonary ventilatory response, I believe it's called, okay? I'm running a half marathon a couple of years ago, and guess what? I'm talking to a professor from WT, and that's his deal. Pulmonary ventilatory response, right? And how people's change. So we're talking physiology while we're running this marathon, right? Yes. And then I asked him, "Can you test me? Could you test me in this and that?" He said, "No, you have to have a special chamber. But I have a friend at UT. If you want to go to Austin, I'll call my friend and he'll test you." I already know I'm good at high altitude. I already know. My climbing partner's 20 years younger than me. I can climb faster than him, so I don't really need the test, right? Believe me, I wouldn't have done that all these years if I wouldn't have known that my brain speeds up, right? But anyway, so respiratory acidosis, right? Acidosis, when you're not breathing enough, if your ventilatory response is not high enough, right? And it's automatic. Yes. I'll tell you a story. There was a guy, he's so low, he's one of the Low brothers. What was his name? His first name, I'm going to think of it. Alex Lowe, okay? He was such an amazing climber, they called him the mutant, okay? He worked on Denali, and what happened was, there are certain climbers that climb a bunch up there, and they're very skilled, and they help the National Park Service do rescues. So they got rescued. Little bitty scrawny Italian guy, my size, only about this tall, collapsed up there at 19,000 feet, right? And they landed the helicopter on the ridge, and he was like 200 yards down. And Alex Lowe ran down there and grabbed that guy and threw him over his shoulder. And he was a small guy like me and ran uphill 200 feet and threw him in the helicopter and saved his life, right? And they're like, how in the heck could you do that, right? Because he just was a mutant, because that was his gift, right? Yes? The next year, he died in an avalanche in the Himalaya. But anyway, right? But his lovely wife got married to one of his best bud climbing partners the next year, and they had more kids, and it's a happy ending. But anyway, amazing, because he had that ventilatory response, okay? Okay. But anyway, there are many different things that cause this, right? What about this? How about a chest injury, right? How about if you have a motorcycle wreck and you bust a bunch of ribs, right? Are you going to be going, if you just busted a couple of ribs? I don't think so. Trust me, okay? Yeah? Now, here's another one too. If you go skiing, we already talked about this story, and you hit your head on a rock, and your brain swells, right? Remember, tail end of your brain, right? Brain stem, right? The controls, ventral and dorsal respiratory group, pontine respiratory center, they all work together to make everything, right? So if it swells and you get pressure on that, right? It can make your breathing slow down and shallow, and you can die, right? It's very common. Okay? Yes? Oh, here's another interesting one, right? Narcotics, right? Narcotics and barbiturates. Barbiturates, okay? Narcotics, yes? Right? People OD on narcotics, and it stops their breathing and they die. It's very common, yes? Right? And again, we talked about that, how now you can go talk to the pharmacist. He'll give you, he will sell you some stuff without a prescription if your kid's a druggie. And if you come home and your kid's laying on the couch, right, you can give them that stuff. I'm going to think of the name of it in just a minute. Narcan, right? You can get it over the counter, yes? Call my son Dave one weekend. Hey Dave, what's up? Oh, not much, Dad. Saved a guy's life yesterday. You saved a guy's life? He's a cop. Yeah, I was a druggie. You know, hey, give him the Narcan. Saved his life. He said, he probably will eat today, but I saved his life yesterday. Right? The Narcan. Yes. Depress your breathing. Oh, by the way, people, you got to be very careful with sleeping pills, because sleeping pills depress your breathing. There's a lot of people that don't wake up in the morning, mainly older people. But anyway, it's very serious. It's one thing to take a sleeping pill once, but when you take a sleeping pill for multiple times, multiple days, that's very bad. But anyway, okay? Respiratory acidosis, okay? Barbiturates, right? Barbiturates. You folks probably don't know much about these. These are downers, right? Yes? You know where the name barbiturates came from? Did I tell you that? The pharmacist that discovered it, they were coming up with a name for it, and his girlfriend was Barbara, and she was way low-key. Very laid back, so he named the drug barbiturates after Barbara. But anyway, his girlfriend. That's where that came from. True story. Swiss guy. Okay. Again, we already said injury to the brainstem, right? Now, let's talk about respiratory alkalosis, right? If you breathe too much. What's the main reason people do that? I would say
Anxiety.
Anxiety, right? Hyperventilation. Yes? Have you ever broken a bone? I have. It's not fun. And what do you do? Right? When you get upset, when you get frustrated, right? And if you don't control your breathing, right? What do you do when you get really scared? Right? Yes? I was doing this rock climb up, it's called the Ellingwood Arret, right? Very famous climb. And I was the lead climber, and I'm going first, and my buddy Kurt's behind me, and I almost fell, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I mean, you know? And so I got to where I had a good stance, and I was hanging on good, and I was doing this, you know? And I knew enough to say, okay, calm down, control your breathing, control your fear. Control your breathing, control your fear, right? Yes? And I got my breathing under control, and my fear went down, and I went on up. And then, a couple of years later, have you ever been to Alamosa and then go to Walsenburg and then cut across to Alamosa on the right-hand side, right? There's Little Bear and Blanca and Ellingwood right there. I did the Little Bear Blanca Traverse. I was by myself, and I met a kid up there, and he was a Colorado hard man, you know. He's 30 years old, he's real muscular, he's got the spandex on, and he's like that, and he's got the cool sunglasses, and he's all tan, you know. And he said, well, I was thinking about doing that. I said, well, I'm thinking about doing that, but I wouldn't want to do it by myself. He said, me either. I'll go with you. I said, look, I'm a lot older than you. If you go with me, you have to stick with me the whole way till we're off and not run off and leave me because I'm going to be slower than you. No, I swear I will. I'll stay with you. We'll do it, right? We got halfway across, and it was freaking scary. It's a rock climb, but it's this way, and it's about a quarter of a mile long. It takes 3 or 4 hours. And we got halfway across. He starts whimpering like a baby. He's up front. And he goes, I think I'm going to fall. I think I'm going to fall, Mr. Colorado hard man, right? So I couldn't slap him, right? Do the John Wayne, come on, you know, right? I couldn't do that. So I had made sure and stayed about this far away from him because if he falls, I don't want to die. I mean, he's a nice guy, but I don't want to die, right? Yes? But I had to get over there in his face and go, you calm down. You're a good climber. You are not going to fall. Control your breathing. Control your fear. Right? Because he was hyperventilating. Right? Yes? Mr. Colorado hard man. Right? And it took him about 5 or 6 minutes, and he got his, you know what, together, and we carried on. But I was scared he was going to pull me off, you know, because he was just turning white. Like a little puppy, I'm telling you. Yes? Right? So, I got him to calm down, and we carried on, and we finished that whole thing, right? And such. And then when we got to the hiking part, you know, after you get off the serious stuff, and we're hiking down, he's so embarrassed. Mr. Big Muscle Colorado hard man, you know. And of course, what did I do? Yeah, you little. No, I didn't. I was thinking that, but I didn't do that. I said to him, oh, you know, no big deal. You know, it's pretty some scary stuff, you know. Right? Yes. But what does that tell you too? Right? You cannot look at a guy and see what he's got. You have no idea. He may look like the biggest, baddest, toughest guy, Sylvester Stallone, and he's really a Tootsie Roll on the inside. That's it. I'm serious. You cannot tell, right? My friend Kurt, little bitty scrawny guy, about this tall, tougher than boot leather. My first climbing partner, had a heart attack within 3 months. He's climbing the Ellingwood Arret with me. Yes, right? He was a tough guy. He wasn't a big muscular guy, but he was a tough guy, right? But anyway, I don't know how I got off on that. Respiratory alkalosis, anxiety, very commonly. You breathe too much, you get rid of too much CO2, you mess with your blood chemistry, right? And it goes this way, and you get the alkalosis. Okay? Okay? Now. Yes, I did that climb last year with my partner Ben. We had the greatest time. He's an awesome climber. He's 20 years younger than me, and he is just an awesome climber. 6'4", 240 pounds. He's a man, I'm telling you. He is solid, and he is a bad you-know-what climber. He's just great. Love that guy. But anyway, right? Respiratory. Strong emotion. Pain. When you get hurt, ow, right? You drop a brick on your toe, it's very common, break a bone, right? Fear, a panic attack, stress, or pain, right? Yes? Now, 2, think about this. This respiratory alkalosis, too, can happen to you if you have an asthma attack and you're... Pardon me. Wow. Yes? You have asthma or pneumonia, right? If you have asthma or pneumonia, the bottom of your lungs are full of water, right? Yes, that can happen because you're trying to get as much air in as you can because half your lungs are not working, right? Yes. Or when you go to high altitude, okay? You're breathing really fast because you're trying to raise the oxygen level. But when you raise the oxygen level, conversely, what do you do to the CO2 level? It goes down, right? Yes? Okay, so those are the 2 ways. It happens very suddenly, within 3 minutes. You can make your blood very acidic, or you can do the opposite and make your blood very basic, okay? Now, but people with diseases have metabolic, not respiratory. That's respiratory breathing, right? Metabolic. So there are metabolic things that screws up your blood chemistry too. Let's talk about those, okay? The metabolic ones. Yes? Yeah. Man, oh man. Okay. Metabolic, METABOLIC, acidosis, right? Metabolic acidosis, right? Yes? Here you go. Number 1, what can make the blood, remember acidosis above 745, right? What can make the blood really acidic, okay? Number 1, severe diarrhea. Severe diarrhea, right? Yes? Let me explain. Remember we said when the chyme leaves the stomach, it's real acidic. The stomach is super acidic, but then when it goes into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, pancreas goes, hey, we don't need all that acid now. We already broke down the protein. And the pancreas cranks out a ton of bicarb. No, I erased it. A ton of bicarb. And the bicarb lowers the pH, raises the pH of the contents that came out of the stomach. You don't want that super acid going all the way through, right? Yes? Yes? I was going to make a crude joke, but I'm not going to, okay? Severe diarrhea from loss of bicarb, right? From loss of bicarb. Yes? From diarrhea. Number 2, renal disease. Right? We talked about chronic kidney disease yesterday. Renal disease, right? The kidneys, remember our protein balance, and we break it down to urea and other acids. So if the kidneys aren't working and we're not getting rid of those acids can build up in our blood, and our blood becomes more acidic, right? Because the kidneys are not cleaning the blood, okay? Number 3, untreated type 2 diabetes, right? Untreated type 2 diabetes, yes? Because we can't we can't use the sugar, we can't burn the sugar and such, and so we burn fat for fuel. And when we burn fat for fuel, we produce ketones. And if it becomes very extreme, that's called ketoacidosis. It's very rare, okay? But we can go into ketoacidosis, all right? And those are the byproducts of burning fat because, again, we got bad type 2 diabetes and we're not treating it, okay? Okay. Number 4, starvation, right? Metabolic acidosis, right? We're burning proteins and fats because we're not putting any food in, yes? Number 5, excessive alcohol. Too much alcohol, right? Alcohol is ethanol. That's the type of alcohol that we drink. It's ethanol, but it breaks down to acetic acid. A-C-E-T-I-C. Acetic acid, and the body's got to get rid of it. Yes? So if you drink too much alcohol, it gets ethanol gets broken down to acetic acid, and we got acidic blood, right? Okay? Now, let's talk about the other alkalosis. Metabolic, right? Metabolic, because it has to do with your metabolism. It doesn't have to do with your breathing. Alkalosis, metabolic alkalosis, right? Okay, number 1, excessive vomiting, right? Stomach's full of acid. If we throw up. You ever had the dry heaves? You ever had that burning feeling in the esophagus, right? Yes. So if you get rid of, you throw up all that stomach acid, guess what? Your body's going to replace that stomach acid. Where's it going to get the acid from? It's going to take hydrogen out of the blood. And when it takes hydrogen out of the blood, guess what's going to happen to the blood? It's going to become alkalotic, right? Right? Vomiting from loss of hydrochloric acid, right? Then I'm going to write hydrogen robbed from blood, right? Okay. Now, number 2, select certain diuretics. Okay, let me explain that one. Okay? We said diuretics make you go pee, right? And so what happens is that we lose hydrogen, right? It's common that we lose hydrogen in urine, but we lose a lot among certain selected diuretics, okay? Okay? We lose potassium and water loss means loss of hydrogen. Okay? Okay? Number 3, ingestion of too many antacids, right? Yes? So this mountain, I climbed this last weekend. I had to go up and over Half Moon Pass. Then I had to climb this big mountain. And then I came down, and by that time, I'm bushed, I'm beat, and guess what I got to do? Go up and over Half Moon Pass 1,000 feet. It sucked so bad, right? So I was feeling like crap. So I took some aspirin for the headache. I drank almost all the water I had. And then you know what else I did? I took some antacids, right? Chewed up some Tums, basically. Generic ones, because I'm not paying for the same thing. I'm not stupid, but anyway. Right? To do what? Right? To get rid of the hydrogen. Acids. Okay? Number 4, excess I also took electrolytes, salt pills, sodium potassium, right? Excess, aldosterone, ALDOSTERONE, right? You got a tumor on your adrenal, you're getting too many of the mineralocorticoids, and too much aldosterone, right? So you lose hydrogen in the urine, right? We say aldosterone, we save the sodium and we lose the potassium. But we also, when we lose potassium, potassium is buddies with hydrogen. We lose a hydrogen, right? Yes? Okay. Again, very critical to keep that blood chemistry right. Yes? We can screw it up several ways. Number one, the quick way is hold the breath. It gets acidic. Or the opposite, breathe too much, it gets too basic, right? And the other way is metabolic, right? Metabolic. So we can either throw up too much, lose all our hydrogen, steal the hydrogen from the blood, or we can have diarrhea and lose the bicarb, right? Or the kidneys don't rid the body of the acids, and the blood gets too acidic, right? And such. And so just another reason to protect your kidneys. The most important way, drink plenty of water, and do not eat too many carbs and get that blood sugar high, right? Yes? I know you guys think I'm crazy about that, and I am, because we got a generation of young people that are getting type 2 diabetes, and I don't want any of you to lose your foot or your toes or your ankle, because you know you have one amputation, but generally within 3 years you're going to have another one, and generally within 3 more years you're going to have another one, right? First your toes, then your ankle, then your below your leg, right? It's an ugly disease that hurts people, right? Hispanic people even more, okay? Have it even more, okay? So I don't want you people to have to deal with that, right? Yes? Or your husband, right? Or your kid, yes? So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And what's it about? What you put in your mouth? Pretty simple, right? And again, we treat it. Yeah, we got all kinds of meds to treat it, but what does it do? Cram the sugar in the cells, right? And it covers up the symptom, right? But covering up the symptom, it's like if I got a big black eye and I put makeup all over it, right? Yes? Did that do anything? Not really. So, okay? So, yeah, I really believe that. I really believe that. Yes. Because again, too, there's a lot more ladies than there are men in here, and who determines what people eat in the family? Usually ladies, right? Who's the doctor of the family? Ladies, right? Do you want healthy children? Right? Yes. So, okay? All right. See y'all tomorrow. And again, we have one more chapter, and that chapter is very long, so we'll split it in two. But we'll also do probably the kidney tomorrow, as long as we have enough kidneys. Okay? All right? Hey. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.